Howdy, BookTube. As you know, I am one of the hosts for a June reading event called June on the Range, created by Michael K. Vaughan, designed to celebrate Westerns, Western novels, which once upon a time towered over the reading world, certainly the pop culture world of reading, and are now all but gone. When an author, a new mustache-waxing, pronouns in the bio, blue-haired, Brooklyn-dwelling, literary fiction marvel of the moment, writes a work set in the Old West between the gold rush of the 1840s and the turn of the 20th century, they do so almost exclusively ironically or ahistorically. So that is it's almost never done legitimately anymore by anyone who wants to be taken in any way seriously. Westerns still are published. That slip of the tongue there, romance novels couldn't do without them. But also explicit Westerns, ordinary formulaic Westerns, also come out every month. But you get the very strong sense that they are for collectors only, that they're for diehards only. Most bookstores don't have a Western section anymore. And that's part of the reason that I love June on the Range, is that it's opening up, it's introducing this genre to a whole lot of people who knew it existed but haven't really considered delving into it. That's a lot of fun. I'm getting emails from people saying, well, for instance, father or grandfather, oh my God, that is such a common theme in the emails that I'm getting. The sentimental element of June on the Range is not something I had anticipated, and it is overwhelmingly strong. It's a learning experience for me. It's a wonderful learning experience for me because it's totally absent from my own connection with Westerns. Totally absent. So I'm getting lots of emails from people saying, Westerns were an absolutely omnipresent feature of my visits to my grandfather, or my father had a whole room of them. But it never occurred to me to pull one down off the shelf and read it. I assumed it was part of their world and could never be part of mine until June on the Range. And I've watched all the rest of you talking about Westerns, so I thought I'd pull one down and read it. And usually the experience has been very good. And a lot of you are signing on to read Lonesome Dove for the month of June with me and Matthew at Mayberry Book Club. This coming weekend, we'll do our first installment of our read-along of Lonesome Dove. And I am taking the same amount of entertainment with June on the Range. There are a ton of Western authors I've never read. Needless to say, there are a ton of Western novels that I've never read. There have been millions of them. There's no way you could read them all. So I'm learning a lot. There's a lot of wide open ground for me to cover. But this first week, I'll wrap it up about this weekend. I've been reading a lot more than I've been talking about. I am a little conscious of overwhelming June on the Range with my own videos. There is precedent for that happening, and I don't know how my co-host would feel. I'm not sure that it would be really fair for me to do 10 videos to their one. But even though I haven't been talking about every book that I've been reading, I have been reading a lot. And in the first week of June on the Range, I have been concentrating on the author who, if you did decide to go into your grandfather's old study or your father's study and pull down a book, almost certainly this would be the author that you pulled down. Almost certainly they would have had every book by this author, probably in really nice leather-bound editions, and that would be the book that you would encounter. And of course, the author is Louis L'Amour. I talked about him a little on a Steve stream yesterday. It turns out having a concentrated talk on one book and one author in a live stream isn't really possible. Instead, the live stream took a life of its own. I started out talking about Louis L'Amour and ended up, of course, talking about the Barnes & Noble in Pikesville, Maryland. And I treasure that, keep in mind. I treasure the fact that the chat takes on a life of its own. So I'm not doing that this time. But I am still trying to figure Louis L'Amour out. That's one of the reasons why I'm reading so much of him at the beginning of June on the Range, to figure him out. I, like everyone else, have read large numbers of his books. There are plenty of them that I haven't read. He wrote well over 200 books. I haven't read them all. But I want to try and get a bead on this author. Not just read Westerns, but get a bead on why he is so preeminent, why he towers over the genre the way he does. I had a feeling that part of that was that he was that wearied old subject, a natural storyteller, what we call a natural storyteller. I had a feeling that was one of the reasons why. And if that's true, I should be able to test that idea in a number of different ways. One that I mentioned yesterday was that if someone is an actual natural-born storyteller, they will be essentially the same kind of storyteller throughout the whole of their career, no matter how long that career is. In a way, and now this is not meant to sound negative, but in a way, a natural born storyteller doesn't have anything to learn. So you won't see a learning curve in their writing, if that makes any sense at all. You won't see it because everything that they need to know to entertain you will already be there. For instance, I mentioned Robert Louis Stevenson, one of the greatest natural-born storytellers who ever put pen to paper. I don't believe that it is possible to see a literary change of any significance in his work from the beginning of career to the end. So I thought, well, okay, if that's true of Louis L'Amour, then one way to test that would be to drop depth charges at different periods in a career that spanned almost 50 years. So I read a novel from 1954 when the number of novels that Louis L'Amour had successfully sold was still fewer than 10. So he'd done a huge amount of writing, but it was still, relatively speaking, the beginning of a long career. And the next one that I chose was much later. It was 1968. This thing is an award-winning novel that he wrote called Down the Long Hills. Again, very, I don't know if you can make it out with the light contrast here, but very evocative cover. There's what you can't really make it out because of the lighting here, because a development is happening in my life that caused me to get to filming videos very late, so the lighting here is not helping. But that is a man leading a horse with two children on it through deep snow. That is what that cover shows. This is from 1968, so it's a good deal of time after the first Louis L'Amour, the last Louis L'Amour book that I read. I also read one before I came up with this depth charge idea. I was reading sort of scattershot all over. So I read Utah Blaine and The Proving Trail. But now I'm concentrating on paying attention to the books in chronological order to see whether or not that factor of Louis L'Amour being a natural storyteller holds up. In other words, if I'm right about that element of being a natural storyteller, then Down the Long Hills will be functionally no different from The Outlaw Trail, the last book that I talked about. And this one isn't. It isn't functionally different. It's certainly not, technically more expertise, technically wiser or better like that. That is certainly not the case. This is the story of two young children, a young boy named Hardy, who's 7, and a young girl who is 3. She's not related to him. She's sort of, they're part of a wagon train that is going down a trail in the rough high country on the border of Colorado and Wyoming. And they are headed to a fort where their father is waiting for them. They are part of this wagon train with a bunch of people that they're in the care of other adults, but their father's not with them. He's been an active presence in young Hardy's life. He has taught him a lot about the ways of the wilderness and how to survive, that sort of thing. But he's not present. And the other character in the story is a big stallion, an enormous, beautiful stallion called Big Red. And he wanders off one night when it had been Hardy's job to secure him. So when the boy realizes that, he goes off looking for the horse. He feels like it's his duty, and also is a little worried that he will be punished. And he's gone very little way from the camp that the wagons have set up for the night when he notices that the little girl is trailing behind him. She never leaves him alone. She is his shadow. He tells her to go back, but he realizes she's not going to do it. So she takes her with him while they go and find the horse, and they do. And he's not big enough to get on Big Red on his own, but is able to put her up on the horse, because Big Red is huge. I forget exactly how many hands tall we're told that he is, but it's a big horse. But when they turn around and get close to the camp, the boy realizes that something is very wrong. He stops. He tells the girl, "Stay right here. Stay where you are. Don't follow me." And he goes and sees the unthinkable, which is that while he was out getting the horse, he survives by random chance. While he was out retracing his horse, the camp was attacked by Indians, by Cheyenne warriors who wiped out everyone, skinned them, scalped them, burned as much as they could. The boy walks amidst the smoldering wagons. He gathers tins of food, whatever he can. And then the only thing that he can think to do is just walk out. The only thing he can think to do is continue down the trail. The one goal that makes any sense is to continue to the fort to meet their father. They can't go back. They can't wander around. They have they have a very slim survival margin, to put it mildly. So they continue on, and an element of the book is their adventures uh, in sheer survival. And it's not just the wilderness that they have to contend with. They are being followed by a Cheyenne brave and his wounded pride, and they're also being followed by a couple of white men who covet the horse. Uh, the, and so it's not just the wilderness; they are being pursued. But that forms a few narrative strands. You get the two children and the horse. You get the men. You get the brave. But the narrative also includes their father back at the fort, who knows that something is wrong and goes out looking for them up the trail to find out what happened, to find out if they survived and where they are, to help them. When you think about all that, all those wheels in place, you'd imagine this is a long novel, but it's not. It's just done very expeditiously. It's done exactly like the expediency of the Outlaw Trail, and it brings up not only the time that this novel was published, a good well over a decade after the last one I read. There's another depth charge here to detect a natural-born storyteller. It comes up with Robert Louis Stevenson. It comes up with a lot of other people, too. And pick a writer that you would consider a natural-born storyteller. There's another yardstick you can use to know. And that is, will they still keep you completely gripped, turning the pages, just comfortably cupped in the palm of their hand, even if they write something that is absurd. And I can attest that that is true, because Down the Long Hills is flatly absurd. The main plot is flatly absurd. It would be completely different if the boy were 15 and the girl were 10. But the boy is 7 and the girl is 3. And the boy and the girl don't act it. They don't sound it at all. The girl is a wind-up doll. But the boy does not act, sound, or think like any 7-year-old who's ever existed in the world. It's a very, very old problem, to put it mildly. Adults, especially male writers, usually find it completely impossible to write believable children. That's a problem that goes all the way back to Euripides, and Louis L'Amour shares it completely. The boy is never even remotely believable. The interior life of the horse is more believable. But it doesn't matter how believable it is. It would never happen. Maybe if the boy, if a 7-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl were lost in Cheyenne territory for maybe an afternoon, a lucky day, maybe they'd survive. Otherwise, no, absolutely not. And it does. You don't have to blame the Cheyenne. You can blame the country. I've walked all over every inch of that country. There is no way at all, none whatsoever. And L'Amour makes it so much worse by piling things on. There's horrible weather. There's all sorts of, anything that'll stick you, stab you, or sting you. And also there's a grizzly bear. The boy fashions a bow and arrows. He fashions a bow and arrows out of raw material and uses it to fend off a grizzly bear. The boy is 7 years old. There is no possibility at all that he could fashion a bow that would have the power to fire an arrow that could penetrate even the skin of a bear, much less kill a bear, much less penetrate bone. Bears can shrug off gunshots. An adult could make a bow that could hurt a bear, but only because the adult would weigh 180 pounds and would need about 120 of those pounds to work the pressure of the bow. That's without industrial machinery. The only thing you're going to be, the strongest you're going to be able to make a bow is the amount of weight you're going to be able to build into it. And a boy who's 7 years old will weigh 50 pounds at most, which means it'd be a 25-pound bow at the most. Generously speaking, at the most. 25 pounds only if really you could somehow get the horse to help you hold the frame. I don't think Big Red did that. There's no way, in other words. It's just a fantasy. It's just a fantasy, and it still works. It still works. The book never lets you go. You don't ever get to that point, moments like that, and say, oh, come on, and stop. You might get to that point and say, oh, come on, but you don't stop. And I bet if you think of any natural-born storyteller that you love, you could think of moments like that, where it's just, oh, come on. I mean, I'm a big fan of yours, but how am I supposed to keep reading after an absurdity like that? But you do. You do keep reading. Uh, I know of moments like that in almost all the natural-born storytellers that I love, even Arthur Conan Doyle. Need I say more than Silver Blaze? So my second depth charge works. Uh, Louis L'Amour he passes number 2 as well. He passed number 1. Actually, they both come true in this novel, because this is every bit as good as the previous book that I read, and essentially no different in terms of its backstage mechanics. And also, it passes another depth charge, which is that there are large parts of it, not the father's search for the children, and especially not the Cheyenne Brave. I wish that he had had the whole book. But the children part is absurd. It's in other words, that deadliest of all words when it comes to a Western. Silly. It's silly. And it would be lethal in lesser hands. It would be lethal if Louis L'Amour weren't actually what I suspect he is, which is a natural-born storyteller, someone who you just need to set him in front of a typewriter and he will spin a yarn that's good, that will keep you reading. This one certainly did. So I'm going to jump forward 5 or 6, maybe 10 years for the next book. I don't know if I'll do that this weekend. I might give my co-host a chance to breathe instead of just burying you all with June on the Range content. But if I wait, then next week I will be well and truly ready. I will have read 4 or 5 Louis L'Amours by then. But I'll pick a book that's a little ways down the trail from here. I'll pick something from, well, the 1970s, obviously, but maybe one in the early 70s and one in the late 70s, just to keep this experiment in mind. I want to figure this author out. There's no question anymore of me picking right. I don't think I could pick a Louis L'Amour novel that I wouldn't like. I'd never read this one before. I read The Outlaw Trail once a long time ago, and I've read Proving Trail a couple of times. But I'd never read this before, and it doesn't seem to matter. He's just a sure bet. No wonder he filled the libraries of your fathers and your grandfathers. No wonder he did. But I still want to figure him out, so that'll be the next thing that I do. No matter when I do it, the next thing that I do will be another read of another Louis L'Amour years after he wrote this one. And we'll just see what we see. So there you go. That's your latest dispatch from June on the Range. I will wrap this up for now, but I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.